On June 9th, 1909, 22-year-old Alice Ramsey kissed her 47-year-old husband, New Jersey Congressman John R. Ramsey, and her two children goodbye and set off in her touring car toward feminist history.
A year earlier, she had been out riding when an automobile sped past her on the road, terrifying her horse and nearly throwing her from the saddle.
Her husband decided that she would be safer if she had a car and bought her a 4-cylinder, 30-horsepower Maxwell DA. Ramsey loved the car, so much so that she put 6,000 miles on it that first summer, driving all over the dirt roads around her Hackensack home. After she entered a 200-mile endurance race, a representative of the Maxwell Briscoe Car Company was so impressed by her driving abilities that he pitched her a tantalizing publicity stunt.
An all-expenses-paid cross-country road trip in a brand-new runabout. She said yes on the spot.
Just 6 years earlier, in 1903, Dr. Horatio Nelson Jackson had become the first person to make the transcontinental drive. While most people at the dawn of the 20th century thought the automobile was just a passing fad with no real practical application, Jackson was convinced it was the wave of the future. He made a $50 bet, nearly $1,700 in today's money, that an automobile could drive from one end of the country to the other.
There was just one problem. He didn't know how to drive.
After a handful of lessons, he bought a used car, a 2-cylinder, 20-horsepower Winton, which he named the Vermont, after his home state, and convinced a young mechanic and chauffeur to make the trip with him.
The journey was a comedy of errors,
including countless blown tires and breakdowns, pulling the car by rope across deep streams, the loss of much of their personal belongings and money, intentional misdirection by people they encountered.
One woman sent them more than 100 miles off course just so that her family and her friends would be able to see the car, still a novelty to most Americans.
And an accident in which Jackson swerved to avoid an obstacle in the road, throwing both men from the car. Oh, and they picked up a mascot along the way, a bulldog named Bud. The dusty roads bothered Bud's eyes so much that Jackson fitted him with a pair of doggy goggles. The three travelers eventually arrived in New York City on July 26, 1903, 63 and a half days after leaving San Francisco.
Today it's a 5-day trip, but back then there was no interstate system. The automobile industry was in its infancy, and America's roads weren't designed for long-distance driving. Okay, back to Alice Ramsey in 1909.
Alice convinced her two sisters-in-law, twice her age, and a vivacious teenage friend to make the trip with her. They made the exact opposite of Horatio Jackson's route, traveling from New York City to San Francisco.
Of the 3,800 miles they traveled, just 152 were paved, and their top speed was an exhilarating 42 miles an hour. And while the Maxwell Briscoe Company would later claim that their car made the trek, quote, without a particle of car trouble, end quote, this was far from the truth.
Over the course of their 59-day journey, they broke down several times, changed 11 tires, had to refill the radiator with ditch water transported a few ounces at a time in their toothbrush cases, had to sleep in the car when it got stuck in the mud and got towed out by horses, navigated by following the telephone poles with the most wires, assuming they led to towns, and ran out of gas because they neglected to check the fuel gauge, which, in their defense, required Ramsey and her front seat passenger to climb out of the car, remove the seat cushion, and insert a measuring stick.
Oh, and they bumped into a police manhunt for a murderer in Nebraska, and in Nevada found themselves surrounded by a Native American hunting party, bows and arrows drawn.
On August 7th, they arrived in San Francisco to uproarious fanfare. Horatio Jackson also had an entourage of press and fans awaiting his arrival, but Ramsey and her 3 female comrades were doing something few thought even possible. After making history, Ramsey returned by train to New Jersey, where she settled into a quiet life, raising 2 children, and later wrote a book about her adventures.
But she never stopped driving. In fact, between 1909 and 1975, Ramsey drove across the country more than 30 times. She also drove 5 of the 6 mountain passes in the Swiss Alps. She would have done the 6th, except her doctor told her she likely wouldn't survive the experience. She died at age 96 in 1983. Stay curious, my friends.